Walt Disney Company's Marvel Entertainment. The former chairman of that division, Ike Pearlmutter, who was released from service a few days ago under the auspices of consolidation and layoffs, has come out swinging today to the Wall Street Journal, and he is ripping Bob Iger and the Walt Disney Company a new one. Here we go.
RENEGADE Online.
Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see all of you out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment, hit that little red subscribe button and turn it to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment below the video before you head out the door today. We got a lot to discuss. I told you so. Ike Pearlmutter was fired, and he is not pulling any punches. Let's go right to the Wall Street Journal interview. In a Wall Street Journal news exclusive, Ike Pearlmutter, Disney fired me from Marvel. I wasn't laid off. Disney says chairman's dismissal was part of a cost-cutting plan, but Ike Pearlmutter says it was because he clashed with the creative executives. From the article written by Robbie Whelan, Ike Pearlmutter says the Walt Disney Company fired him as chairman of Marvel Entertainment because he pushed Disney too aggressively to cut costs and ran afoul of the creative executives whom newly returned Chief Executive Robert Iger wants to empower. Now, as you might recall, this was a big point of contention between Mr. Iger and his predecessor and successor at one point, Mr. Bob Chapek. Chapek wanted to move things to a more distribution-focused system at Disney, whereby business executives would make more decisions regarding expenditures and where projects were distributed versus letting the creatives have free rein. And this was also something that Mr. Perlmutter agreed with Mr. Chapek on. And it's also one of the reasons why Mr. Perlmutter, as you may recall from our reporting, was very, very much in favor of Nelson Peltz becoming a board member at the Walt Disney Company. Peltz, who feared, along with Mr. Perlmutter, that if something wasn't done at that point last year, that Mr. Iger would be making a return to the Walt Disney Company, ostensibly for the worse. In a rare interview, the 80-year-old Ike Pearlmutter spoke to the Wall Street Journal about his dismissal from Disney last week, his relationship with Mr. Iger, and missteps he feels that Disney has made in recent years. Disney is legendary for the loyalty it engenders in most typical employees, but Mr. Perlmutter was no typical corporate employee, nor did he act like one. If he didn't like what he saw from leadership, he picked up the phone and aired his concerns to powerful allies, like former Disney CEO Bob Chapek and activist investor Nelson Peltz. When Disney was battling with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Mr. Perlmutter said he called him too. Ron, you're right. Disney doesn't have the right to get involved with politics. Now let's stop right there, because that has never before now been disclosed. That wouldn't have appeared on an SEC filing by the Walt Disney Company, filings that we covered previously that chronicled the contact and communication on the official channels between the Walt Disney Company and Nelson Peltz, who had become an activist investor at that point, seeking a board seat. In this article, Mr. Perlmutter says that he personally reached out to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to tell him that he was on Ron DeSantis' side and tell him that no, Disney should not be getting involved at the political level and the legislative level. It seems like common sense to most thinking people, but apparently Disney doesn't always think. According to sources close to Mr. Perlmutter, they suggest that he owns approximately 30 million shares of the Walt Disney Company. Now, frankly, that is a number that is much higher than what I had anticipated. If you think back to 2009, when the Marvel deal was created with the Walt Disney Company, it was a purchase deal of about $4 billion in cash and stock. Usually, the nature or the specificity of those deals is relatively undisclosed to the public except for the figure itself. But based on that information, it would appear that Ike Pearlmutter owns about $3 billion worth of outstanding Disney stock. But moreover, Perlmutter for years had been trying to convince the Walt Disney Company to spend less on its Marvel Studios superhero movies, which he believes are too long and too expensive to produce. Quote, I have no doubt that my termination was based on fundamental differences in business between my thinking and Disney leadership because I care about a return on investment, Mr. Perlmutter said. Oh, where have you, my wonderful audience, heard that expression before, particularly in regards to Disney properties, particularly in regards to Marvel Studios properties in this case, about ROI or return on investment? Where have you heard that before? Mr. Perlmutter, I need to buy you a drink. Disney executives and Marvel Studios leadership, he said, have a singular focus on ticket sales. Marvel's superhero movies distributed by Disney have grossed more than $23 billion globally, making it one of the most successful franchises in Hollywood history. Quote from Mr. Perlmutter, all they talk about is box office, box office. I care about the bottom line. I don't care how big the box office is. Only people in Hollywood talk about the box office. Keep talking, Ike. I love you. As the chairman of Disney's separate Marvel Entertainment, Mr. Perlmutter ran the much smaller comic book publishing and merchandise licensing business. Yeah, but that was only after people like Kevin Feige and, as we know now, probably heavily involved, Victoria Alonso ran him out of the studios, and Iger was happy to get rid of him. Of course, that was back in 2015. Where are you at now, Vicky? A Disney representative said Tuesday that Horacio Gutierrez, Disney's chief lawyer and general counsel, called Mr. Perlmutter and told him that his job was being terminated as part of the company's broader effort to cut $5.5 billion from its content and administrative budgets and eliminate 7,000 jobs. Mr. Ike Pearlmutter said that he doesn't remember Mr. Gutierrez giving him that rationale for his dismissal. That's a very nice way of Mr. Perlmutter saying that Disney lied. Again, quote, that was merely a convenient excuse to get rid of a longtime executive who dared to challenge the company's way of doing business, Mr. Perlmutter said. Last summer, Perlmutter said that he had found an ally in his crusade to cut Disney spending in Mr. Nelson Peltz. The two men who own mansions near one another in Palm Beach, Florida, had been friends for years and regularly dined together with their wives. And you know that pissed off Bob Iger something awful. Although not formally involved with Mr. Peltz's campaign, Mr. Perlmutter called Disney directors and lobbied them to add Mr. Peltz to the board. And that goes back to the SEC filings that we frequently reported on here on Valiant Renegade over the last several months since they were made public. Mr. Perlmutter said he took the step of joining an activist campaign against his own company because Disney executives had proven unreceptive to his suggestions. Quote, my experience with any major corporation, when they're having problems and they don't have the free cash or whatever it is, usually people like Nelson Peltz know how to put it back on track, Mr. Perlmutter said. Quote, I learned one thing about creative people my whole life. You cannot give them an open credit card. I'm sorry. You cannot give them an open credit card. They're doing this for 30 years. Why would they change? That's just it. They wouldn't change. And after Mr. Perlmutter was shown the door of Marvel Studios in 2015, being relegated to the back corner with comic books and merchandise, and at that point was when Victoria Alonso and Kevin Feige basically took full control of the studios, what happened to the budgets of the films at that point? They exploded. The expenditures exploded. Now, most of Phase 3 at that point had been mapped out, and Mr. Perlmutter would have been involved in that. But everything that we've gotten since then, Phases 4 and 5, where the budgets really went off the rails, and the box offices have collapsed by comparison to the predecessors that came in previous phases, now we can really see the paint has come off the car and the polish has come off the turd, and Mr. Perlmutter has been shown to be completely correct. Morton Handel served as chairman of Marvel Entertainment before Disney acquired it, had known Mr. Perlmutter for 45 years. Ike's a penny pincher, Mr. Handel said. It's irritating to some people, and there are some people who don't believe in that manner of running a business, but in my own experience, I have never come across a more effective manager than Ike Pearlmutter. Obviously, Disney didn't care. Mr. Perlmutter was also frustrated by the clashes over the past year between Disney and Mr. DeSantis. The governor attacked Disney after the company publicly opposed Florida's parental rights and education law. And we've covered that at length as well. And I want to remind folks that Reedy Creek is an independent, or supposed to be an independent special taxing district, not an arm of the Walt Disney Company. Ike Pearlmutter said that he advised Disney executives, quote, "Don't get involved in politics. You're going to get hurt. It's a no-win situation." And another home run for Ike Pearlmutter. Mr. Iger called Florida's actions against Disney over the past year anti-business and anti-Florida. He also said the company has a right to freedom of speech. In 2015, Mr. Iger removed Perlmutter as the head of Marvel Studios after a dispute over movie budgets between him and Feige, Marvel Top's film producer, who now serves as chief of the studio. At the time, Mr. Perlmutter and his advisor, Alan Fine, served on a creative committee at Marvel that made recommendations on the screenplays and the budgets of Marvel movies. In a February CNBC interview, Iger said that Perlmutter, quote, "was intent on firing Kevin Feige, and I thought that was a mistake, and I stepped in to prevent that from happening," close quote. Mr. Iger said the decision led to Mr. Perlmutter's unhappiness that lingers to today. Perlmutter described the clash as a disagreement over movie budgets, and he wasn't trying to get Mr. Feige fired. After leaving the studio, he continued as chairman of Marvel Entertainment. Mr. Perlmutter said he still received a profit and loss statement on every Marvel movie until 2021, when the studio cut off his access. He continued to weigh in on strategic decisions and criticize budgets that he felt were too high. Whoa, so that's new. Not only did Ike Pearlmutter just say Bob Iger was a damn liar again in his CNBC interview, but Perlmutter also seems to reveal that he was completely cut out of any financial information beginning in 2021. I wonder what was going on in 2021 with Marvel Studios that they would have wanted to cut him out. Why, if I'm not mistaken, I believe two things happened. The giant failure that is Phase 4 for Marvel Studios was launched. And also, a certain executive at Marvel Studios was elevated to head of physical and post-production and VFX at that point, who certainly hated Ike Pearlmutter. And that was Victoria Alonso. As recently as October, Perlmutter asked Marvel's leadership for financial information on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, a 2022 movie that grossed $956 million globally. At various points, Perlmutter said he raised concerns with then CEO Chapek about what he viewed as out-of-control spending on Marvel movies. And according to Perlmutter, Mr. Chapek agreed with him, but said he didn't have the ability to change the spending plans because they had already been approved by senior management. Can we just, the whole video will just be hashtag Renegade is right. Just the whole thing. Perlmutter is basically telling you straight up what we've been saying now for the last 2 years. Chapek was put in a no-win scenario. His office at the Walt Disney Company was quite literally the Kobayashi Maru. He had nothing in front of him for the 11 months that he had free reign as CEO, but massive projects from a multitude of studios, including Marvel, that had already been greenlit and budgeted and approved outside of his purview. He could only ride the wave of failure at that point. He was set up for disaster. And it looks like once Bob Iger finally got himself into the big chair that, frankly, he never left physically in the C-suite in Burbank, he started cleaning house. And that started with Kareem Daniel, and now we've moved our way down to Ike Pearlmutter. Basically, anybody that opposed anything that Iger was doing, anybody that had a disagreement with the financial management of the creatives and the studios at Disney is being shown the door. Mr. Perlmutter continued, there was no way to force the issue, in this case for Mr. Chapek, because the creative people at the Walt Disney Company are very powerful. Now, the remainder of the article goes on to discuss that Mr. Perlmutter has made contributions to charitable organizations and politicians that some would deem to be certainly left-leaning. And that's just fine. At the end of the day, for a company like Disney, all that matters is, do you have somebody that's actually managing your money properly? And it looks at this point, let there be no doubt that Ike Pearlmutter was let go because he clashed with the creatives. He clashed with Bob Iger. He wanted Disney to be more fiscally responsible instead of just waving fireworks and sparklers in the air, saying, look how much money we raked in at the box office, with no regard for what the actual profitability of any of these films are. You see, you can't have a company like Disney acting like people on Twitter and TikTok who don't understand how business works. That's fine for the riffraff on social media. That's not okay for a Fortune 500 company whose stockholders expect it to perform. And with additional news like this continuing to come out from people like Ike Pearlmutter, it's becoming almost impossible to think that Disney is doing anything serious at this point to course correct, that it's going to continue down the same path that began under Bob Iger years ago and looks to be continuing right now. I hope I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong. Disney has made some of the greatest entertainment and intellectual properties in Hollywood history. They just don't seem to be capable of that anymore.